This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Mateli Edwards. Tonight's top stories from East Asia. South Korea's constitutional court reinstates impeached Prime Minister Han Duck-soo as acting president, saying he did not violate the constitution. He returns to work with a call for national unity. Now, the reinstated Mr. Han immediately ordered all-out efforts to combat deadly wildfires sweeping through South Korea's Sancheong. Western Japan faces similar devastation. Residents are fleeing as flames gut their homes. China, Japan and South Korea's foreign minister met in Tokyo over the weekend. Is this a chance for Beijing to forge closer ties to nations traditionally aligned with Washington? Our correspondent weighs in. And in business news, China's best-selling automaker BYD is due to report its full-year earnings in the next few hours. Markets anticipate revenue could top $100 billion, which would put BYD ahead of arch-rival Tesla. Also in East Asia tonight, America wants to revive shipbuilding at home and put the brakes on China's industry dominance. But are massive levies on China-linked ships the answer? And Hong Kong's financial chief highlights the city's unique role as a gateway to mainland China and Asia, as policymakers and business leaders gather in Hong Kong for an investment-focused leadership event. South Korea's acting president, Han Duck-soo, has vowed to safeguard the country's national interests amid a global trade war, following his reinstatement by the Constitutional Court today. Well, the court's ruling struck down Mr. Han's impeachment, voting 7-1 that he did not betray the people's trust. The acting president returned to office immediately, calling for national unity and an end to political division.
대한민국이 합리화 상식의 시대로 나아갈 수 있도록 오로지 나라와 국민 전체를 바라보며 제가 들어야 할 모든 목소리를 듣겠습니다. 대한민국이 지금의 위기 국면을 헤치고 다시 한번 위와 앞을 향해 도약할 수 있도록 여야의 초당적 협조를 간곡히 부탁드립니다. 감사합니다.
South Korea's main opposition, Democratic Party, has expressed regret over the Constitutional Court's verdict. The decision is effective immediately and cannot be appealed. For more on this, we are joined now by CNA's Lim Yun-suk in Seoul. Yun-suk, today's ruling, what are the implications?
Well, the opposition-controlled parliament had impeached several high-ranking government officials. And so this is really just one of the rulings because there were about 29 of them who were impeached by parliament. But having said that, today's ruling is important because it is for the acting president, Han Duck-soo. Now, he was the acting president after President Yoon was impeached by parliament in December for that martial law declaration. And so having this acting president, Han Duck-soo, back into the office, many observers here are saying it's good news for South Korea, especially since he has been a diplomat for decades. And, he was a finance minister in the past, and he was also the ambassador to the United States. And so the timing is perfect. And in a way, I think a lot of South Koreans were saying before the court ruling that they didn't think that the case was so strong enough for the Constitutional Court to impeach him. But many did welcome the news, saying that this was good news for South Korea, though they did voice some concerns about the future of South Korea. So let's listen to what some of them had to say.
정치는 복잡하고 너무 아파. 저 사람들도 막 이상하고. 그러니까 뭔지 몰라도 윤 대통령이 나와서 이제 나라를 일을 해야 우리가 잘 살 것 같아.
전체적인 국정 안정에 대해서는 잘 됐다고, 안정성에 대해서는 그렇게 생각을 하지만 이게 또 다른 이 탄핵을 반대하는 그런 또 이 사람들에게는 다르게 또 이 악용 내지는
야당 쪽에서 조금 서둘러서 좀 그 탄핵을 해버리고 거기에 대해서 너무 빨리 탄핵 법원에 좀 신청이 되지 않았나.
So, in general, South Koreans welcome the news, but also right now the focus is really not on Prime Minister Han Duck-soo, but also on President Yoon Suk-yeol, who the Constitutional Court has yet to set a date for the ruling. Many here thought that would be happening sometime in early March or even last week, but that has not happened yet. And so right now, although they welcome the news of Prime Minister Han, we'll have to wait and see what the Constitutional Court decides to rule on for President Yoon Suk-yeol.
That's right, Yusuf, because all eyes will be on President Yoon, who faces a separate criminal trial over leading an insurrection. Tell us a little bit more about today's pre-trial hearing and also what we can expect next.
Well, this was the second pretrial session today. President Yoon Suk-yeol did not attend it, though he did attend the initial first session, and that was because there was really no need for him to do so. It was just really going through the procedures, what they will be discussing in future trials. But at the criminal court today, they did decide that the next official trial will be starting on April 14th. Now, having said that, that is the separate trial apart from the Constitutional Court. But as you can see behind me right now, I am here in downtown Seoul, and that is the Gyeongbok Palace, where usually you'll be seeing lots of tourists, walking around, and South Koreans. But there have been massive rallies across South Korea, and especially here in central Seoul. And, you have people denouncing President Yoon, some people supporting President Yoon. And so this is a very polarized nation. And so all eyes will be on the criminal court proceedings, but also on the Constitutional Court. And hopefully South Korea will be able to go back to its normal ways.
All right, thank you so very much for that report. CNA's Lim Yoon-suk live in Seoul at the Gyeongbok Palace. South Korean acting President Han Duck-soo's first major directive after his reinstatement was to call out for all-out efforts to contain multiple forest fires across the nation. Well, the flames have been raging for days now in the southeast. He has also declared 2 more regions as special disaster zones. The provincial government is dispatching up to 36 helicopters to join the more than 2,300 firefighters and soldiers already on the ground. The Defense Ministry is also mobilizing more than 1,300 additional troops from the Army, Marine Corps and Air Force to help contain the blaze. Well, the forest fires, which began last Friday, have killed 4 firefighters and injured half a dozen other people. More than 1,500 residents in affected areas have been forced to evacuate. Wildfires are also tearing through 2 prefectures in western Japan. Officials are urging hundreds of residents in the areas to evacuate. In Okayama Prefecture, a mountain forest fire erupted in the southern part of Okayama City yesterday. The blaze is reportedly still raging in multiple locations and has since burned more than 250 hectares of land. No injuries have been reported. Authorities have also ordered some 900 residents to evacuate as the fire threatens nearby settlements. In Ehime Prefecture, hundreds of firefighters and helicopters have been deployed to contain forest fires that broke out in the city of Imbari yesterday. Well, sections of an expressway near the blaze are closed, while some rail services are also suspended. Our top diplomats from China, Japan and South Korea are seeking common ground amid heightened global trade tensions as they held talks on security and economic issues over the weekend. The Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi says that their 3 markets collectively can exert significant international influence. He also expressed hopes of resuming free trade talks with their neighbors. Meanwhile, Seoul and Tokyo are seeking Beijing's help to denuclearize North Korea. Bilateral meetings also took place on the sidelines. The Chinese and Japanese diplomats held their first high-level economic dialogue in 6 years, with Japan confirming China's commitment to allow imports of its marine products. Right, also on the sidelines, Japan and South Korea. We have Michio on standby, ready to talk to us. Michio there. First up, help us understand this. How do observers in Japan view the outcome of the meetings with the foreign ministers of China and South Korea?
Hi, Oteli. Well, the fact that 3 foreign ministers met in Tokyo is a good sign. All parties want to improve ties. They are 3 Asian giants, and stability in their relationship is vital to the region. So Japanese Foreign Minister Takeshi Iwaya, who was the chair, sought a stable development of ties between the countries. And for that, the 3 parties agreed to set a concrete plan in 3 areas: understand each other better, cooperate to shape and protect livelihoods, resolve issues pertaining to all generations from children to the aging population. But analysts here think the main objective of the meeting is to work together to counter U.S. President Donald Trump's tariff threat. The U.S. is the world's biggest economy, but for Japan, China is its biggest trading partner. Mr. Won stressed the need for multilateralism, free trade, but Mr. Iwaya is seen to have been more cautious about causing any unfavorable ripple effect on its economic ties with the U.S. as an ally and as U.S. is leaning towards protectionism. Now, analysts here do not think a trilateral free trade agreement between Japan, China, South Korea is possible.
Now, Mitchell, we can't deny that there are still some deep-seated disputes among these countries, but are there some indication that ties are indeed improving among the East Asian neighbors?
Well, with South Korea, first of all, ties have improved significantly since President Yoon Suk-yeol took power. He acknowledged Japan's apologies and regrets for the colonization of the Korean peninsula. Mr. Yoon made efforts to solve Japan's unhappiness with the verdict of South Korea's court decision that Japanese companies must compensate Korean laborers during its colonization, including the comfort woman issue. Japan claims all wartime-related compensation was handled and resolved based on the 1965 bilateral agreement. And it's uncertain whether Mr. Yoon will return to his duties as president, but at least Foreign Minister Cho Tae-yul assured to maintain and continue the positive atmosphere and strengthen cooperation with the U.S., an ally to both. Now, with China, Japanese Chief Cabinet Secretary Yoshimasa Hayashi started the week issuing a complaint to a statement Beijing issued. That is Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba telling Foreign Minister Won, quote, Japan respects the position detailed by the Chinese side, unquote. Mr. Hayashi said such statement was never made and asked Beijing to delete it. Also, what did not set well was Foreign Minister Won Yi telling Japan to remember history and with that in mind to build trust. Now, analysts here recalls in January, Prime Minister Ishiba visiting President Trump of the U.S. They referred to Taiwan Strait opposing to the change of status quo. And just this March, Japan's former chief of staff, Shigeru Iwasaki, was appointed Taiwan's cabinet advisor. And there are many grilling issues between Japan and China. In the East China Sea, tension is high around islets both countries claim. Japanese are detained in China without any clear explanation. Tokyo wants China to resume imports of its marine products. Based on an agreement with Beijing, in February, Chinese expert was included in the International Atomic Energy Agency's team to assess the safety of treated nuclear wastewater discharged from the crippled Fukushima nuclear plant. And with this mission completed and safety confirmed, Foreign Minister Iwaya said the process for resumption of exports will start, but no date has been specified. And the 3 parties aim to arrange a trilateral summit by the end of the year, but a clear date has not been set for that either.
Hey, many thanks for that report. CNA's Mitchell Ishida live from Tokyo. We're time now to go for a short break, but coming up next on East Asia Tonight, Singapore vows to maintain an open economy and foster international trade as about 20,000 industry leaders and government representatives from nearly 80 countries gather in the city-state for the annual Maritime Week. Hello again. Good to have your company on East Asia Tonight. It is now time for business news with Roland Lim. And Roland, BYD is on everybody's lips at the moment. What is the big deal here?
Well, I'll tell you, the chatter is about to get louder. The car maker is set to report its full-year earnings today, and markets are anticipating revenues could top $100 billion. This will be the first time for BYD and will put it ahead of Tesla, whose 2024 sales were at $97.7 billion. Now, its share is closing nearly 3% up in preparation for yet another strong performance. China's domestic demand was particularly strong in the last 3 months of 2024, thanks mainly to Beijing's generous auto trade-in subsidies. Year-end price discounts and dealer rebates also supported auto sales. Now, BYD's total car deliveries last year climbed to 4.25 million units. For 2025, BYD expects to ship as many as 6 million vehicles. But BYD's sales overseas may have come under pressure. A series of events, such as the EU's probe into BYD's plant in Hungary, and then China's delayed approval of its Mexican factory and labor dispute in Brazil, have hit overseas demand. For more insights, let's speak with Eugene Xiao. He is head of China Equity Strategy and Autos at Macquarie Capital. He joins us from Hong Kong. Eugene, very good to have you with us. I guess, first off, I should ask you, even though the results aren't out yet, what are your expectations for BYD's report card?
Well, we expect Q4 earnings to be very strong, just given the typical seasonality. And of course, the subsidies that you mentioned ago, that really helped into this latter half of the year, as there was a little bit of concern at the end of 2024 that these subsidies would not continue into 2025. Subsequently, they have, but that did help try to drive some demand into Q4. So we do expect a very strong sales beat in this coming up results.
I want to talk about the rivalry between BYD and Tesla. Now, some pundits are saying that for BYD, their vehicles are double that of Tesla's at a quarter of its price, and now its battery can be charged within minutes. So is it game over, do you think, for Tesla?
I think it's still very early stages for the global EV story. I think in China, it's very different, of course. China, the EV penetration last year reached nearly 50%. I think this year we're going to well exceed that. And you can see that in China, the market is the most competitive in the world. So in that perspective, I think it's much more difficult for Tesla to gain more incremental share in China. Globally, though, I think it is a bit of a different story. I mean, BYD does have a cost advantage, but clearly there's a lot of geopolitical issues that the company has to work through before they can become a very strong and credible competitor to a Tesla down the road.
Okay. How then do you see BYD's latest battery advancing, helping it to steer further ahead of its rivals in terms of actually trying to woo over new customers, do you think?
I think it's very important because what they're looking at is what are the reasons for people not to buy an EV. So last year, they announced a model and a marketing slogan, which was electric cheaper than petrol, effectively saying the price of the car would be lower than the comparable ICE model, right? So it's just that's attacking the cost part of it. Now, recently, they're attacking the charging part of it, meaning the other reason people may not buy an EV is because it just takes too long to charge. Now they're offering these, 1 megawatt charging solutions. Potentially, you could charge a car as fast as refueling it. So you can see they're attacking this EV adoption story from different angles. And I think that's been their strategy to try to boost their sales.
And BYD has also been dealing with overseas issues, the Mexican factory drawing opposition, both the Mexican government and Beijing, over tech leakage. Hungary plant investigated by Brussels. And in Brazil, local labor officials accusing BYD of, quote, slavery-like conditions. Do you think these issues would impact BYD's expansion into the lucrative European market?
For Europe specifically, I do think that the issues right now really come down to a lot of the geopolitical concerns around tariffs. You're probably aware last year, Europe put an additional tariff on Chinese exports of battery electric vehicles. BYD got off a little bit better than most. I think I got an additional about 18% tariff, but that means their total tariff is close to 40% for any BEV export into Europe. So that, I think, is still the bigger concern. However, I do think that the EU probe recently of the Hungary plant does put another wrench into that plan to expand into Europe. However, right now the base is still very low. I mean, they don't sell that many units in Europe at the moment. So again, the growth potential remains very high for BYD right now.
Talking about its own domestic market, BYD's success in China has been largely attributed to its vertical integration in the firm, controlling the supply chains from the lithium mines, the factories. It's pivotal, actually, in producing low-cost cars. How will they maintain these costs under controls in international markets, given that they will have to contend with new supply chains, higher labor costs, environmental standards, and tariffs?
No, that's a great point. I think that's going to be the challenge for them going forward because they do have this incredible cost base within China. However, as they go abroad, either via exports or via local production, they will need to figure out ways to try to replicate that. I do think that there is some know-how that's transferable in terms of the cost of, let's say, building a battery or building a car. And the thing about this company that has been fairly amazing is they've been able to engineer a lot of these savings into the car itself, how they manufacture the car. So it's very well known they have this system called the blade battery that kind of attaches the battery as a part of the car. So this is one other way they've been saving costs beyond just the savings from trying to avoid tariffs or local production. So I think a lot of these costs, eventually they're going to figure out a way to engineer them out of the car as they go overseas.
Eugene, thank you for those insights. That was Eugene Xiao, head of China Equity Research at Macquarie. Singapore will maintain an open economy and foster the growth of international trade while doubling down on its maritime sector to be more efficient, competitive, and trusted. Senior Minister Lee Hsien Loong said this at the Singapore Maritime Week, adding that this is how the country will prepare for a challenging geopolitical landscape. Nicholas Ng tells us more.
A record turnout at this year's Singapore Maritime Week, with over 20,000 attendees from around the world gathered here to talk about the future of the maritime industry. But outside these halls, not all is smooth sailing, with unpredictable trade winds, turbulent international relations, and protectionist policies. Those are challenges that Senior Minister Lee Hsien Loong says might stop global trade from keeping pace with GDP. It's something that's happened before. Take a look at this graph, which shows the value of trade as a percentage of global GDP dipping during the global financial crisis.
If the trade to GDP ratio starts to fall, there will be serious economic and strategic implications. At the least, it will dampen economic growth in many countries, which will cause further social and political problems, both domestically and internationally. And in that event, the world would truly enter a new epoch, which it has not seen since the Second World War.
With Singapore's trade 3 times that of GDP, Mr. Lee says the country is committed to staying open to preserve the benefits of the multilateral trading system, and is doing so by continuing to expand the network of free trade agreements with efforts by local firms to strengthen supply chain linkages. He adds that Singaporeans will not be left behind.
We are upskilling them to operate new AI and digital systems and to advance technologies such as remote key cranes, drones, underwater robots. With this support, our people will embrace and make full use of technology instead of resisting it and jeopardizing both Singapore's competitiveness and their own livelihoods.
Looking to the future, Mr. Lee says Singapore's investment in Tuas Port serves as an example of how the country has bold plans to grow the maritime sector. At a fireside chat later, Mr. Lee added that he sees the rise in container volume cargo from Southeast Asia, and that Singapore can position itself to capture these traffic flows.
If we are efficient, we can be the place where you ship the container in, the next ship comes, in 8 hours, the next ship turns around, it goes out. The container is tracked, is safe, never gets lost. Then I think we can continue to make a living for ourselves, and we will still be there 30 years from now, and looking for the next bound beyond that.
Singapore Maritime Week will continue over the coming days, with deals expected to be signed, deepening collaboration in emerging areas, such as autonomous vessels and wind technology.
And you can catch me bright and early tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. Singapore-Hong Kong time at Singapore Maritime Week in Suntec City. I'll be speaking to maritime leaders and industry captains to discuss key issues and developments in the sector like AI. But for now, it's back to you, Telly.
Well, it is an early start for you, Roland. Tomorrow I'm going to leave you to catch your beauty sleep. Thank you so very much for that report. Well, time now for another break, but coming up next on East Asia Tonight, the U.S. wants to counter China's shipbuilding dominance and build up its own capacity, partly through proposed levies on Chinese ships. Could this upend global trade? We delve into the issue shortly. You're watching East Asia Tonight, and here are the headlines we're following. South Korea's Constitutional Court reinstates impeached Prime Minister Han Duck-soo as acting president, saying he did not violate the constitution. He returns to work with a call for national unity. Now, the reinstated Mr. Han immediately ordered all-out efforts to combat deadly wildfires sweeping through South Korea's Sancheong. Western Japan faces similar devastation. Residents are fleeing as flames gut their homes. And China's best-selling automaker BYD is due to report its full-year earnings within hours. Markets anticipate revenue could top $100 billion, which would put BYD ahead of arch-rival Tesla. Canberra is fast-tracking nearly $1 billion Australian dollars, or some $630 million in defense spending in tomorrow's federal budget to boost its military capability. Well, the funds seek to accelerate projects such as the domestic production of guided weapons, a frigate program, and a new submarine base for AUKUS, a security grouping aimed at curbing China's regional ambitions. The push comes as U.S. President Donald Trump pressures American allies to ramp up defense spending.
This is the most significant increase in defence spending in peacetime Australia since the end of the Second World War. Part of the $10.6 billion sees bringing forward an additional $1 billion. And that's because of the need to accelerate Australia's capability development.
Australia, meantime, has received its first HIMARS rocket system, describing it as a, quote, game changer for long-range strike capabilities. The US-made system, used by Ukraine against Russian forces, can hit targets more than 500 kilometres away. Defence Minister Richard Marles says it will give Australia greater mobility and firepower in the region. Now, companies and trade groups are warning of higher costs for importers and consumers and a risk of job losses as the U.S. announces a plan to impose steep fees on Chinese ships calling at American ports. Now, the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative is set to hold a two-day hearing in Washington today to discuss proposals of billion-dollar levies aimed at curbing China's dominance of the shipbuilding, logistics, and maritime industry. Well, depending on the vessel's origin, the proposals could add a surcharge of up to $3 million for shipping. Many businesses also argued that the proposal would potentially be devastating for the U.S. economy. According to the USTR, China currently produces more than half of the world's cargo ships. Conglomerate China State Shipbuilding has described Washington's measures as a breach of the World Trade Organization rules. Now, can the U.S., through its proposed levies, help the country revive the industry? Well, for more insights, we are joined now by China specialist Andrew Leung from Andrew Leung International Consultants. Well, thank you so very much for joining us today, Mr. Leung. Well, first up, critics have argued that these levies could be more disruptive to global trade than Trump's previous tariffs. I mean, some critics are going as far as to say that this could risk trade apocalypse. So help us understand this. Do you foresee this reshaping international supply chains, and which industries will be hardest hit?
Well, there are two sides of the equation. First of all, the United States wants to bring shipping back, shipping in terms of shipping trade back more to the United States or to ports which are more under the control of the United States. So that's shipping. That's one side of the equation. The other side of the equation is to bring the construction of ships, the shipbuilding itself, back to the United States. And so there is a United States, various senators and House representatives are already drawing up a law called Save Our Ships Act, trying to bring shipping construction back to the United States. Because if you look at the construction of ships, the United States only accounts for something like less than 1% of the world total, compared with China's lion's share. This affects not only commercial shipping, but also the military, the navies, and the vessels that are required in case of war. So I think that there's a two-pronged strategy: bringing the shipbuilding back to the United States and bringing the shipping trade back to the United States using kind of levies, as you just mentioned. But however, most of the ports are now controlled by China. That's perhaps why the BlackRock consortium is trying to buy all the ports from Hutchinson, something like 43 ports overall, and this is part of the equation. Now, however, leaving aside this commercial transaction of buying the ports, imposing the tariffs obviously is hugely disruptive. But let's not forget that not all the ports are in China. Out of the top 11 container ports in the world, China accounts for the top 7, including Hong Kong. And the amount of shipping at the moment using American ports is only a smaller fraction. So just imposing the tariffs or levies on American ports is not going to change the picture.
Yeah, so Mr. Leong, I just want to jump in here and just pick on what you're saying about how the U.S. They're aiming to rebuild its industry after decades of relying on other countries. But it is a challenge, isn't it? I mean, to rebuild an industry that has been largely outsourced.
Of course, because it's not just waving a magic wand. The American shipping industry, the construction, the building, has already atrophied after decades of neglect, not only in terms of shipyards, but also the cranes, the heavy machinery, the skills, the whole production chain. It's not there. As I said, the United States only accounts for 0.1% of all the ships, commercial vessels built around the world, and that is beginning to affect the U.S. Navy's ability to construct ships. And there's a very favorite kind of comparison. The efficiency of China's shipbuilding is like boiling dumplings. You keep on putting the dumplings in a pot, and they all come up very, very quickly. So, for
I like
example,
that analogy there, Mr. Leong. I have to bring in Japan and South Korea since we are East Asia tonight. They are also the only other major shipbuilders, though. I mean, could we see a shift in global ship orders to these nations, or do you think China's scale and cost advantage makes it simply irreplaceable?
Well, China definitely has the cost advantage, but in terms of the volume, China accounts for the lion's share, even compared with Korea, South Korea, and Japan. As I said, China accounts for something like 80% of all the ships built around the world. As I said, it's not just shipbuilding; it's also trying to bring the shipping trade back to the United States. But without that's the reason why the U.S. Trade representatives are drawing up rules to impose huge levies. I mean, you just mentioned about $3 million per call by any Chinese vessel. So it's targeting the Chinese vessels. And of course, as I said, most of the ports are not controlled by the United States, and hence perhaps that's the reason for the Hutchinson deal.
Right. And are Trump's policy even sustainable? Because I'm curious to know whether these measures could actually backfire on the U.S. economy, because it's going to raise consumer prices, it's going to drive more trade to probably non-U.S. ports like Mexico or Canada. So how sustainable is this policy in the long run?
Well, you may use the same argument against tariffs. Tariffs obviously could backfire. The tariffs, of course, would increase the kind of goods purchased by American consumers, and it's going to make the inflation worse. and maintaining leading to the necessity of maintaining high interest rates, which is not good for the U.S. economy. You can say all that, but I think the Trump administration is aware of that. It's also saying that this is only a temporary, and then in the long term, tariffs is a beautiful weapon, and also using American coercion to bring shipping back to the United States. According to some of their advisors, it's a long-term strategy. But as I said, it's unlikely to happen because the American shipping industry has been completely hollowed out. It only accounts for 0.1%, less than 1%.
Well, I'm glad you highlighted that, Mr. Leung.
Production.
So very quickly, because we are running out of time, then given, China is obviously would have strong opposition to this. What sort of retaliatory measures do you think Beijing will take? Is it going to be back to more tit and tat sort of measures?
I think that these disruptions are so huge, and China is now using the rare earths, and hence that's really touch a raw nerve of the Trump administration, and hence their pivot towards Greenland, because a lot of rare earths there. The pivot towards owning the resources in Ukraine, for example. The rare earth is a choke point. The rare earth goes into the military weapons, but also in the mobile phones, lots of machinery. But I think that I think China preferred negotiation. I think that the Trump already said likely to talk to President Xi, and he's likely to visit China, and President Xi is likely to visit the United States and celebrate the birthday together in June.
Yeah.
So I think the opportunities are there for a more amicable solution.
That's right. Things could change again. We'll certainly be watching out for that. Thank you so very much. It's been great speaking with you, Andrew Leung from Andrew Leung International Consultants. A time now for another short break, but coming up on East Asia tonight, policymakers and business leaders uncover investment opportunities amid geopolitical risks. We bring you the latest from the Milken Institute's Global Investors Symposium in Hong Kong. Despite new looming U.S. tariffs implicating China's special administrative region of Hong Kong, many still see investment hope in the city. At Monday's Milken Institute Global Investors Symposium in Hong Kong, participants from various sectors like finance and fintech are looking for bright spots to tap on in the city. Mei Wong with this report.
A financial hub, an international trading center, and a tourism destination. Hong Kong reminded participants at a symposium that it's all that and more. Although the US-China trade dispute has also dragged Hong Kong into the fray, the city of 7.5 million is not letting that slow down its economic recovery.
Our strong fundamentals, resilient economy, unique role as a gateway to the Chinese mainland and Asia, as well as our quick stride to develop financial services and the tech sector, continue to provide unparalleled opportunities for global investors.
Hong Kong says it's pushing ahead on several fronts, such as implementing reforms to strengthen the competitiveness of its financial markets, ramp up AI research and development, and further enhance tax concessions to attract more single-family offices. Some participants laud these moves and point to the fact that because China remains the second largest economy in the world, Hong Kong still has an important role to play.
Hong Kong is the easiest window to invest, for the world to invest into China, and for Chinese companies to access global capital. It's also through Hong Kong. If you believe in that, then these should be enough of green shoots to propel Hong Kong back to its former prominence.
Some, however, believe investors are exercising caution as they're concerned geopolitical tensions may alter policies.
We are seeing the way US has been imposing tariffs on their biggest trading partners, and we are expecting some uncertainty around it even for exports from India, and there have been some sound bites around it. At this stage, I think it's more of a wait and watch.
But Hong Kong is not waiting. It has lined up several more of such investment forums so international participants can visit Hong Kong and see the potential firsthand. Despite external headwinds, Hong Kong's economy continues to grow steadily at 2.5% last year. But Hong Kong Financial Secretary Paul Chan says the charm of Hong Kong as a top business and tourism destination goes beyond the numbers. He gave the assurance that Hong Kong remains an open, vibrant and diverse city. Mei Wong, CNA, Hong Kong.
Well, a number of discussions and debates at the Milken Symposium in Hong Kong, including one that was focused on a complex global macroeconomic outlook, hosted by CNA's Beijing correspondent Olivia Seong. Well, uncertainty around the Trump administration's policy, the role of artificial intelligence, and how China's DeepSeek moment would play into the intensifying tech war with America were themes explored by the panel. Well, Olivia asked economist and author Ke Yu-jin about Beijing's latest drive to boost weak domestic consumption as it pushes towards its ambitious GDP growth target of around 5% this year.
Speaking of consumption, that is a major task, and the government announced this 30-point action plan. Is that going to be enough? Because, as you mentioned also in your book, that Chinese have in their DNA this high savings rate. Is this action plan going to be enough to shift behavior for China to transform its economy into one that is driven by domestic consumption?
The last year's figure is something like Chinese consumption as a share of GDP is 38%, which is really, really, really very low compared to much higher levels in advanced economies, obviously. And it's actually gone down. I think the last few years there was more precautionary saving that is, in addition to the usual saving motive. But here's the core problem. I think that people in China, the ones that really have the highest marginal propensity to consume, are those hundreds of millions of people in the rural areas without the proper access to Social Security and access to health care and education in the way that urban residents are. If you look at the average pension of a rural consumer compared to urban consumer, it's only 5% of an urban consumer. If you look at the migrant workers, 300 million migrant workers, even on the same income as an urban person, they consume only 1/3 of what an urban resident would be. So we're talking about hundreds of millions of people in this big pocket of China, undereducated, underemployed. They should be the focus group. So some of the new policies which I do more agree to is not so much of the short-term ones. I mean, I think these are really helpful as well. But, there's been talk about village rejuvenation, really reviving the countryside, bringing back some of the industries, building up infrastructure there, building up small cities, satellite cities around there to concentrate consumption possibilities and infrastructure. I think that's the right direction to go. And if you ask where China's potential is, well, it's there, right? That's a massive pocket of underinvested places that needs to kind of converge with the rest of the other cities. And and then there are other reforms. While urban land reforms have gone through, rural land reforms have really very much lagged behind. So, for example, rural residents have to rent two places, one in the rural area, one in the cities, without having any ownership in the rural area. So there's no wealth effect. So all of the reasons beyond the one, there's a cultural thing, there's a precautionary saving thing, is that the people with the highest marginal propensity to consume, they need to be the focus area. So part of the consumption policies is really to focus on the low-income group, and I think that's the right direction.
If I just pick up on that, the leadership has also signaled that it has ample policy space to react to external uncertainties. Where do you see this policy space being?
Well, the Chinese government has so many tools, so many levers that can turn around. To just give you a simple example, right? The real estate crisis, everybody wants to do more there. But in China, in Shanghai and Beijing, we still have restrictions on how many apartments you can buy. Okay, Tianjin recently did something interesting. Tianjin, the place next to Beijing, said, look, anybody in the country who wants to buy an apartment here, they can get access to local schools. Why? Because it's all very, very much controlled, right? So even in terms of these small policies left and right, there are lots of different levers, but there's monetary space, there's still more fiscal space. If the central government decides to do more fiscal transfer to the local government, say, look, give back all the private, pay back all the private sector debt. Right? I think that would revive a lot of the economic conditions.
Right, here are some of the other news that we're also tracking on East Asia tonight. Japan has launched a new joint command for its self-defense forces to improve its ability to respond to contingencies amid heightened regional tensions. Some 240 personnel are part of the new establishment that will integrate the SDF's air, ground and maritime troops. The Joint Operations Command also aims to improve coordination with the U.S. military. Washington announced last year that it will remodel its forces in Japan to take on more operational responsibilities as a counterpart to the new SDF command. The Hong Kong government has stepped in as complaints mount over a botched ticketing process for Coldplay's concert in the city next month. Authorities have told ticketing agent CityLine to provide remedial actions over misprinted tickets. A ticket issuer initially offered ticket exchanges only in Hong Kong, upsetting mainland Chinese fans who decried the additional logistics and financial costs. CityLine added 2 more locations in Guangzhou and Shenzhen for ticket exchanges after authorities intervened and said it will refund handling fees. Some headlines from media outlets in East Asia. The cherry blossom season in Japan has officially begun after trees started to bloom in Kochi, western Japan. Kyodo News says that more than 5 blossoms were spotted on a so-called specimen tree at the Kochi castle. Well, that specific tree is used as a benchmark for the declaration of the flowering season. K-pop girl group NJZ, formerly known as New Jeans, says it will suspend all music activities. Yonhap News Agency reports that the move is to comply with a recent court ruling that prevents NJZ from pursuing activities separate from the group's agency, Adore. And Chinese state news agency Xinhua says the country's women's curling team has secured a spot in the 2026 Winter Olympics after winning the bronze medal at the World Women's Curling Championship. They beat host South Korea 9-4 over the weekend. And that wraps up this Monday's edition of East Asia Tonight. Don't forget your headlines anytime at cna.asia. You can also find us on Facebook and YouTube. Thanks for watching.